This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Ranger Sara and I work at the Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center in Duluth, Minnesota. When I started working here in 2014, I knew almost nothing about boats. Even now, I still feel like I'm scratching the surface because there's just so much to learn about this industry. One of the things that I was curious about, though, was the names of the vessels and what they meant. So that's how this program came about. For this program today, I specifically chose vessels that we commonly see on our side of the lakes and actually had to trim my list quite a bit in the interest of time, acknowledging that there are hundreds of current and historic vessels out there with names to be explored. Not only that, but many of the current vessels that we see and that we'll talk about today have been renamed. So what were their old names and what were their meanings? It's easy to fall down a rabbit hole when you're researching this topic. This program may turn into somewhat of a series, a themed series. So if you have any vessel names that we don't address or you're curious about after today's program, feel free to put those in the chat and we may create a separate program with exploring more vessel names. So this program will focus on some of the people and places that Great Lakes cargo vessels were named after. So we will get right into it. Okay. All right. These familiar boats are frequent visitors to the Twin Ports, but did you ever wonder who they were named after? The vessel on the left, the Liaison Gira, has a long history, starting with her almost immediate service in the Navy, where she served in the U.S. and overseas, earning a battle ribbon and star for her involvement in a U-boat attack that she still proudly displays. You can kind of see in the photo on the left. Her battle star is up there. The Polar Sugartha has its own distinction of being the longest vessel currently operating on the Great Lakes at 1,013 feet. Both vessels are part of Interlake Steamship Company's fleet. Mrs. Dorothy Lee Anderson Tregurtha was born on February 5, 1937, in Lake Forest, Illinois. She attended Cornell University, where she studied architecture, and that's where she met her future husband. Dorothy married Paul in 1958, and she's been active in civil and educational organizations and charitable activities. Mr. Paul Richard Tregurtha was born in Orange, New Jersey on September 27, 1935. He also went to Cornell, attended Harvard Business School where he met James R. Barker in 1963. They quickly became friends and business associates. Mr. Tregurtha is the current vice chairman of Interlake Steamship Company and the chairman of the board at Mormac Marine Group, who used to own Interlake before Paul Tregurtha and James Barker bought it. But Paul and Dorothy aren't the only Tregurthas to have a ship named after them. Well, technically it's a tugboat pushing a barge. The Dorothy and Pathfinder is named after one of Paul and Dorothy's daughters. So now let's talk about the other half of Interlake Steamship Company, the Barkers, who now have 3 vessels, including the newest one built for the U.S. fleet, named after them. The James R. Barker was the first 1,000-foot vessel built for Interlake in 1976. She is frequently seen in Duluth loading iron ore pellets or coal, and she's got arguably the best horn on the Great Lakes. K.E. Barker was built in 1952 as the Edward B. Green and operated for different fleets before joining Interlake in 1989 and being renamed the K. The K is a less frequent visitor to the Twin Ports, being shorter than the James R. Barker. Her maneuverability is used along rivers in the lower lakes by Interlake. We'll talk about the third Barker in a moment. Mr. James Rex Barker was born in Cleveland, Ohio on August 3rd, 1935, and graduated from Columbia University. Then he joined the Coast Guard for a couple years before attending Harvard University, where he met Paul Tregurtha. Mr. Barker has extensive experience in the maritime transportation industry and is currently the chairman of Interlake Steamship Company. Mrs. K. Elizabeth Barker was born on November 1st, 1935 in Chicago, Illinois. She received a Master of Social Work degree from Simmons College in 1963. She married Mr. Barker in 1957 and is involved in nonprofits. In the photo on the left is Mrs. K.E. Barker breaking the celebratory bottle of champagne on the bow of the motor vessel James R. Barker in 1976 when it was christened, and the real James R. Barker watches as his wife does this in the background. The third Barker is Mark W. Barker, who is the son of James and Kay, and he's the current president of Interlake Steamship Company. The motor vessel Mark W. Barker is the first Great Lakes bulk carrier to be built on the Great Lakes in more than 35 years. And according to Interlake Steamship Company, this 639-foot ship will carry all types of cargo throughout the freshwater lakes and river systems, but was designed to navigate the tight bends of the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland. So we may not see her very much on this side of the lake, but hopefully we'll get a chance someday. And she will be officially christened in Cleveland on June 16th of this year. Another ship that I researched is the Walter J. McCarthy Jr. Walter, this person was interesting to read about, and I got a lot of information from his obituary, unfortunately, which was in 2013. He was the former CEO of Detroit Edison, which is an energy company in Detroit. And it's actually where most of the Western coal from our port is shipped. He was born in New York in 1925, and his grandfather owned the ferry that provided transportation before the George Washington Bridge was built. And so he spent a lot of time as a child riding on the ferry, and that's where his lifelong passion for boats and engineering and New York was established. He earned a degree in engineering from Cornell University and distinguished himself as in the field of nuclear energy, promoting the benefits and safety of nuclear energy. He was actually played an advisory role after the Chernobyl meltdown in 1986. For 37 years, Mr. McCarthy worked at Detroit Edison, which culminated in his tenure as CEO. He's also well known in Detroit for his philanthropy. He's a big champion for the arts and actually especially enjoyed attending and supporting the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. He retired in California and still returned to the Great Lakes every summer to take a ride on his namesake. He was remembered as a loyal manager who knew the names of all of his 10,000 employees. In addition to his nuclear achievements, he was also credited with the formation of Midwest Energy Resources Company, which is a subsidiary of Detroit Edison, to transport cleaner coal over 1,000 miles from the west to the Midwest by a combination of rail and vessel. Midwest Energy is located over the bridge in Duluth in Superior, Wisconsin. And in honor of his retirement from Detroit Edison, a 1,000-foot coal freighter was renamed the Walter J. McCarthy Jr. So it's interesting to me to find out some of their other passions and interests and what else they were involved with. The Honorable James L. Overstar was a former congressman from Minnesota who served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1975 to 2011. He earned a reputation as Congress's primary expert on transportation issues and was the chairman of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He sponsored many bills and laws that protected and benefited the transportation industry while protecting the environment. Interlake Steamship Company renamed a vessel after him after he died in 2014 because of his significant contributions to Great Lakes shipping and the U.S. maritime industry. The Overstar came through Duluth on the day of his funeral in 2014, which was pretty neat to see. And this next slide illustrates how many U.S. Great Lakes fleet cargo vessels are named after leadership at U.S. Steel or shipping companies in general. I wanted to focus on U.S. Steel a little bit just to give a little bit of background about U.S. Steel because it's important for our next namesake. As you can see on the list, almost every early leader except for Walter Munford had a vessel named after him. The ones that are currently operating are for sure the Gott and the Spear. The Blau we're unsure about, but as you can see, a lot of the earlier leaders had vessels named after them, and it stopped around 1980 because that's when the shipbuilding in U.S. stopped for a while. U.S. Steel started in 1901 and were very large and influential in the early part of the century. They provided steel and built many bridges and skyscrapers and other buildings, including hospitals and schools, during the turn of the century. And they provided the steel for the Empire State Building, which the company moved into in 1931. U.S. Steel supplied hundreds of millions of tons of steel to be used to build planes, ships, and tanks, and a variety of other military equipment for U.S. war efforts. They were a very large, influential industry corporation. So next we'll talk a little bit about Roger Blough. I thought this story was also interesting. Roger Blough was born in 1904 and was the chairman of the board and chief executive officer of the United States Steel Corporation for 13 and a half years, from May 1955 through January 1965. These were the post-war years, and there was a lot of growth and then some decline during that time. He's best known for serving as the American steel industry's spokesperson when the industry clashed with the Kennedy administration on the issue of rising steel prices. President Kennedy was concerned about rising inflation, and at the time, the steelworkers bargained over a contract with the nation's steel company, which was getting nowhere. So they asked the Kennedy administration to intervene, and they came up with a pact with 10 of the nation's 11 steel companies that called for an increase in fringe benefits worth 10 cents an hour in 1962, but no wage hikes that year. The agreement also said that the companies would not raise their prices. However, on April 10th, Roger Blough, who was the CEO of U.S. Steel, which was the largest of the steel firms in the U.S. at the time, met Kennedy in the Oval Office and told him the company was immediately raising prices by $6 a ton, and that other companies would follow, and 6 did, in fact. So this made President Kennedy very angry, and in a press conference, he called the price hikes a wholly unjustifiable and irresponsible defiance of the public interest. He criticized a tiny handful of steel executives whose pursuit of power and profit exceeds their sense of public responsibility. The execs had utter contempt for the U.S., Kennedy said. So the Roger Blough ended up dropping his prices a couple days after this happened because the Kennedy administration would develop packages and or give contracts to other steel mills that did not raise their prices. So he bowed down to the pressure from President Kennedy. But he got his picture on the cover of Newsweek magazine and earned himself quite a reputation at the time. And because I know some of you probably want to know this, let's talk about Edmund Bacon Fitzgerald. Yes, Bacon is his middle name. He was the former chairman of Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance, and his father, William Edmund Fitzgerald, was president of Milwaukee's Dry Dock Company, which built and repaired ships. His grandfather, John Fitzgerald, was a ship captain, so Edmund has a lot of family history in the shipping company. So just to give you that little tidbit of information about the Fitzgerald. And now this is your chance to tell me a little bit about what you think about the program so far. If you're so inclined, feel free to answer any or both questions on this slide in the chat. What is the most interesting thing that you've learned about one of these people so far? And which one would you want to have a conversation with? I'll give you a few minutes to write your answers. Someone wrote Blau. Yes, he does sound like a very interesting person to speak with and talk to. Another person wrote Blau. All right. Yes, he seems like one of the more interesting people that we discussed so far. Okay, now we'll move on to our second category of places. In the people section, we focused on U.S. fleets, and now we'll expand to some other common U.S. and Canadian vessels that visit Twin Ports. First of all, I want to mention the area of Indiana Harbor and Burns Harbor, which is located at the southern tip of Lake Michigan. It's by Gary, Indiana. This area has two vessels named after it, the Indiana Harbor and Burns Harbor. Burns Harbor is the location of Cleveland Cliffs' second largest U.S. steelmaking facility, and the Indiana Harbor Complex is one of the largest integrated steelmaking facilities in North America. And of course, the Gary Steelworks is in that area as well. So the steel industry is booming in those locations, and a lot of the iron ore pellets that are shipped out of Duluth go to these areas to be made into steel. That's why those areas are important to the industry, and that's why these vessels have those names. The Presque Isle is an integrated tug barge, and this one kind of has a funny story. Erie Marine held a naming contest in 1973, and their head of accounting, Mr. Richard Raleigh, suggested the name Presque Isle. And this pays tribute to the peninsula that protects the harbor at Erie, you see on the map, Erie, Pennsylvania, in which this vessel was primarily built. It's from the French word presqu'île, I believe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that means almost or very near an island, which, as you can see in the photo, it kind of is. The next vessel in this category is the Maumee, which is named after the largest river basin in all of the Great Lakes. It begins in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and ends in Lake Erie. The Port of Toledo utilizes the Maumee River for its cargo movements, and the Maumee is a barge that is currently pushed by the tug Victory. So because of the importance of this river to the shipping industry, that's how this vessel gets its name. You'll see a couple other similar ones coming up. The Michipicoten is a very frequent visitor. She comes about once a week to the Twin Ports. Michipicoten is an Ojibwe word for big bluffs, and it's also the name of a First Nations group in Ontario. This community is located on the eastern end of Lake Superior, pretty much opposite from Duluth, where I am, and it is also a river. Next, the Saginaw, also a river and community. The river is 22.4 miles long, and it's in Michigan, and it flows northward into the Saginaw Bay of Lake Huron through the city of Saginaw and the port terminals in Bay City. So again, because of its importance in the shipping industry, it's got a vessel named after it. Next, we will talk about Thunder Bay, which is a port on its own. It's a port town in Ontario, Canada. It's just a 3.5 hour drive from Duluth. The port was built to provide access to European markets for Western Canadian grain producers through the longest grain chain supply in the world. So farmers in Western Canada can get their products out to the rest of the world via the port in Thunder Bay. The CSL Welland was named after the Welland Canal, which is a series of 8 locks that assist vessels from Lake Ontario to Lake Erie and bypasses Niagara Falls. The Welland Canal has a length restriction of 740 feet, so our 1,000-foot vessels cannot operate on Lake Ontario. They can't get through the Welland Canal. CSL Cineboine is our next one. This vessel honors Canada's grain-producing western provinces and was submitted by the retiring manager of the Canadian Shipping Lines Winnipeg office. The Cineboine River originates in southeastern Saskatchewan, crossing the wheat-growing plains of Manitoba, emptying into the Red River at Winnipeg, Manitoba. The Cineboine is also the name of an Indigenous group in Canada and the U.S. And ALPENA is named after a city in the lower peninsula of Michigan. The owners, which is where the owner of the ship's headquarters is, and there's a large cement plant there. So it's a cement carrier, and its name sort of fits the trade. It's where the cement is moved to and from. Now, again, if you would indulge me in answering either both or one of these questions. Have you been to any of the places mentioned in this section, and which place would you visit? I'm just going to take a few minutes to let you put in your answers in the chat. Someone's been to Thunder Bay, and someone would like to visit Michigan. Saginaw, yeah, I'd like to go to Michipicoten. Hear about a lot of these places, but you don't know a lot about them until you kind of look into it sometimes. ALPENA. All right. All right. Well, that's great. Thank you for participating in that. Appreciate it. All right. Well, with that, that is all I had today for the program. Like I said, there are so many different names and places, and not only that, but different, I call them other. For example, like American Spirit was named after the spirit of the American workers. You know, we have names like that we can explore. And again, if you have names that we didn't address, I saw someone asked about the Arthur M. Anderson. Anderson was a leader, he was a manager of U.S. Steel. So I had a whole series of U.S. Steel people that I was going to talk about today, but I cut a bunch in the interest of time, which I'm kind of short. But anyway, that will be a good one for the next program as well. Someone also asked if I know anything about the Viking war shields on Presque Isle, and I don't. I'm sorry, I don't know anything about that. So before we get to questions, I just wanted to provide a little bit of information about our visitor centers. The Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center in Duluth, Minnesota is currently open Thursday through Monday from 10 a.m. until 4:30. We have cell phone tours outdoors and an online gift shop. The Sioux Locks Visitor Center in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, their park is open from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. and their visitor center will be reopening on May 8th. And again, we don't have our schedule just yet for our upcoming programs in October and beyond. But when we do, we will be sure to post those and send those out to everyone. I am sending the survey link in the chat if you have a few minutes and wanted to fill out that survey. That would be cool. And I'm also going to put in another link for, oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. Another link that will take you to where all of our recorded programs are located. It's the YouTube page for the Detroit district. And at this time, if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can have a little discussion about that. I'm going to stay on for a few minutes still. Someone asked about the Van Enkevoorts. The Van Enkevoort Tug and Barge Company owns the Dirk S. Van Enkevoort, which I believe is the son of Clyde S. Van Enkevoort. Clyde and Joyce are married, the Joyce L. Van Enkevoort. And the Laura S. Van Enkevoort is the daughter-in-law of Clyde and Joyce, married to Dirk. So it's Van Enkevoort. The Sulaks camera, I can tell my counterpart at the Sulaks that there's an issue with it. Thank you for letting us know. Someone asked about the Blau being repaired, and I don't know for sure. I've heard people talking about it not coming back out into service, but I do not know for sure what the ultimate disposition of the Blau will be at this time. I don't think any official word has been sent out about the Blau, but that is one of the favorite ones to watch, and it would be a shame if it was no longer operating. I'll just wait a couple more minutes in case anyone thinks of any questions. The Mesabi Miner, yes, the Mesabi Miner is still running, and the Mesabi Miner's name is sort of a recognition of the hard work of the Mesabi Iron Range employees in Minnesota, one of the large iron ore producing regions in the U.S. So that Mesabi Range is one of the iron ore ranges in Minnesota. So that's what the Mesabi Miner is named after. Ryerson and Sykes are another good one. That would be another good one for another program. The Ryerson or the Sykes is interesting. I did a little research on that, but didn't include that in the program today. It's actually a person from New Zealand, but there's a little bit more information about him out there that we can add to a future program. All right, I don't see any other questions, so I will be ending this in just a few minutes. You're welcome. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you back in October. As I said, we will finalize our schedule for the upcoming fall and winter, and we will get that out to everyone as soon as we have that. I believe one of the topics that we're looking at is another update on the new locks at the Sioux, and we're working on a program about ghost towns of, or like old mining and shipping ghost towns of Minnesota. So there's going to be some interesting programs coming up this fall for us. So thank you again for joining us today, and take care, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.